Water roared like thunder as it rushed down from the hills, tearing into the brand-new subdivision below. Streets that had barely been paved buckled and cracked under the force. Lawns perfectly trimmed and advertised as dream lots, just weeks before vanished beneath a tide of muddy, relentless current. Neighbors screamed in panic. A mother's voice cut through the chaos. "My baby! Somebody grab my baby!" Children clung to porch rails as toys and bicycles floated past. Cars bobbed like toys in the surge. The calm image of suburban order collapsed in minutes, and at the edge of it all, two figures stood still. Lillian and Harold Johnson, an elderly black couple with faces weathered by time, clasped each other's hands as though anchoring themselves against the chaos. They did not move, they did not shout, they simply watched. Before we continue the story, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications for more daily stories. Drop a comment to let us know which city or country you're watching from. For weeks, their warnings had gone ignored, their letters were tossed aside. Their history was dismissed as nostalgia, irrelevant in a world obsessed with progress. Tonight, the land itself had answered for them. Breaking news. A reporter's voice cut across the footage, urgent and sharp. A sudden flood has devastated the Bradford Creek subdivision. Dozens of homes are underwater, and officials say the cause may be deliberate. The cameras would call it sabotage. Reporters would call it a crime. Officials would soon call it reckless endangerment. But to Lillian and Harold, standing at the dam their great-grandfather had built with his own hands, this was something far different. To them, this was justice. And the question that would divide a community, spark outrage across the state, and place the Johnsons at the center of a courtroom battle was simple. But how did a quiet, church-going couple who had spent their lives in peace reach the point of unleashing nature itself? To understand, we have to go back. Back to the morning the first orange stake pierced their soil. Back to the moment the Johnsons realized their family's legacy, the very ground their ancestors had fought to claim, was about to be erased. Because what unfolded next wasn't just about land. It was about memory, dignity, and a fight no one expected two elderly farmers to wage. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the Johnson property, 70 acres of hills and meadows that had belonged to their family for almost a century. To anyone passing on the road, it looked like an ordinary piece of southern countryside, but to Lillian and Harold Johnson, every inch was sacred. Samuel Johnson, Harold's great-grandfather, had bought the land in 1912 when few black families dared dream of ownership. He worked it by hand, planting orchards, tending crops, and most importantly building a dam on the creek that cut through the valley. That dam wasn't just stone and water, it was survival. When banks refused loans, Samuel's dam kept his crops alive through drought. It was his declaration to the world. We will not be erased. Harold carried that declaration in his bones. Even in his 70s, he walked the property every morning, running his palm along the fence posts like a soldier inspecting the lines. His hands were calloused, his gait slowed by time, but his pride never faltered. Lillian's bond to the land was softer, but no less fierce. She often sat beneath the old oak tree, the one where her grandmother used to sing hymns during long summer nights. Beneath its branches, Lillian had carved her initials next to Harold's when they were barely teenagers. To her, the land wasn't property, it was memory. Neighbors sometimes asked why the couple never sold. "It's too much work," they'd say. "Wouldn't you rather retire in comfort?" Lillian always smiled politely, but in private she would whisper, "This isn't just land, this is our bloodline." But peace never lasts forever. On a quiet morning, just as the dew was burning off the meadow, the hum of cicadas was drowned out by something heavier. A low mechanical growl carried on the wind, foreign and unsettling. Lillian froze mid-step. Harold, standing by the dam, lifted his head slowly. He knew that sound. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't farm equipment. It was machinery, and with it came the first shadow of a battle neither of them wanted, but both would be forced to fight. The sound grew louder each day until it was undeniable. Machines weren't just passing by, they were advancing. Lillian stepped onto the porch one morning to find a white envelope sitting neatly on the doormat. The seal of the Bradford Creek Homeowners Association was stamped on the corner. She called Harold to her side as she slid a finger through the flap. The letter was crisp, typed in the kind of detached language that left no room for humanity. The HOA intends to develop 65 new homes on available land adjacent to the Bradford Creek subdivision. We invite your cooperation in moving forward with progress. Available land? Harold's voice cracked, half disbelief, half fury. He stared out over the meadow, where wildflowers bent gently in the breeze. This isn't available. This is ours. The words felt like a slap. To the HOA, nearly a century of Johnson history had been erased in a single phrase. By evening, orange survey flags appeared in the field. Bright, almost cheerful, they fluttered against the soil like plastic intruders. The Johnsons walked out to pull one from the ground, and Harold's hand trembled as he yanked the stake loose. The wood splintered under his grip. That night, they stayed awake, listening. Past midnight, headlights crawled along the edge of their property. Bulldozers idled like predators waiting for the kill. Lillian whispered, "It feels like they're circling us." Harold didn't answer. He was staring at the old dam, its stones black in the moonlight. He had seen this before, not the machines, but the arrogance behind them. The belief that black land could be taken, twisted, or stolen under the disguise of progress. The next morning, Harold confronted the first crew he saw unloading near the property line. "This is private land," he said, voice steady but firm. The foreman barely looked up from his clipboard. "HOA cleared it. We're just doing our job." Harold's fists clenched. "Your job is trespassing." "This, revirant," the foreman shrugged. "Tell that to the board." And with that, the machines revved, chewing the earth with indifference. When Lillian saw the first trench carved into the meadow where her grandmother's lilacs once bloomed, her knees buckled. She fell to the dirt, clutching the soil as if her hands alone could hold it together. But it was only the beginning. What the HOA called progress, the Johnsons now understood for what it was, an invasion. The Johnsons refused to stay silent. When the next town hall was announced, Lillian ironed her best dress, and Harold polished the old shoes he wore to church. If the community needed reminding that their land carried history, then she would be the one to speak it. The room buzzed with chatter as developers laid out glossy posters of Bradford Creek Expansion Phase 2. Smiling families filled the renderings, children running across pristine lawns where the Johnsons' orchard still stood. When Lillian's turn came, she walked slowly to the microphone. Her voice trembled at first but steadied as she spoke. "My great-grandfather Samuel Johnson built the dam with his bare hands when no one believed a black man could even own land. He raised crops here. He raised his children here, and we raised ours. You call it available, but to us, it's sacred." For a moment, silence hung over the hall. Then the HOA president, Emily Grant, rose from her seat at the front. Sharp suit, sharper smile. She leaned into the microphone with practiced poise. "While we respect the Johnsons' memories," Emily said, her tone dripping with false courtesy, "the community must prioritize growth. Sentiment cannot stand in the way of progress." Polite applause followed, thin but cutting. Lillian's heart dropped. She scanned the crowd. Neighbors she'd cooked for, neighbors who once borrowed her sugar, clapped politely for Emily's dismissal. Some avoided her gaze entirely. Back at their seats, Harold's jaw was locked tight. He whispered so only she could hear, "They don't just want our land, they want us erased." The weeks that followed proved him right. Old friends stopped waving from their porches. People who once lingered to chat now crossed the street. Some even muttered, "Maybe you should sell. Don't hold everyone else back." Lillian tried to reach out again, calling the HOA office, leaving messages with city officials, even writing letters to the local paper. The replies, when they came, were clipped and cold. "Your concerns have been noted. All permits are in order. The board appreciates your feedback." It was bureaucracy sharpened into a weapon. At night, Harold and Lillian sat on their porch, the glow of construction lights spilling over the horizon. The sound of saws and drills filled the night air. For the first time in their 70 years, the Johnsons felt like strangers on their own land. And in that isolation, betrayal burned hotter than grief. The orchard fell first. Trees Harold's father had planted decades ago were ripped from the ground, their roots dangling like torn veins. A bulldozer plowed through without pause, its engine roaring as if history meant nothing. Next came the meadow, The wildflowers Lillian's grandmother once gathered for Sunday service disappeared beneath trenches cut for sewer lines. The hum of cicadas was smothered by the grind of machinery and the shriek of saws. Each day the Johnsons rose to new scars on their land. Each evening they sat on their porch and listened to the steady gnaw of progress, the whine of drills that chewed through the silence of twilight. They tried to fight it on paper. Harold called City Hall until his voice cracked, each conversation ending in the same monotone refrain. All permits have been approved. Lillian wrote letters to the local paper, but none were published. When she posted their story online, ads for new Bradford Creek homes drowned her words. Their neighbors grew colder. Friends who once stopped to chat now crossed the street. Others muttered, "Maybe it's time to sell," as if surrender was the only option. One evening, Harold stood at the porch railing, staring across the valley. Construction lights glared against the night sky, turning the horizon into a battlefield of shadows. He spoke without turning his head. "They're building over our ghosts." Lillian's chest ached. She took his hand, her voice low but steady. "Then maybe the ghosts need to remind them they're still here." The next morning, as if in answer, fresh survey stakes appeared, this time not in the fields, but at the very edge of the dam. Bright orange flags fluttered where Samuel Johnson's hands had once set stone. The bright orange survey stakes stabbed the ground at the very lip of the dam. To anyone else, they were harmless bits of wood and plastic. To Lillian, they felt like knives in her chest. She walked down to the water's edge, her knees trembling. With both hands, she traced the weathered stones, the ones her great-grandfather Samuel had set with his own palms. She whispered through clenched teeth, "This is Samuel's blood. They can't take this from us." Harold came behind her, his shadow long across the stones. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight. "If they take the dam," he said slowly, "they take everything." For the first time in their marriage, there was nothing else to say. That night, they sat on their porch in silence. The horizon glowed with the relentless blaze of construction lamps. The air was filled with the drone of drills and the beeping of trucks reversing, each sound a reminder of the theft in progress. Lillian tried to pray, but the words stuck in her throat. She gripped Harold's hand until her knuckles turned white. Neither slept. At 3 a.m, Harold spoke into the dark. "We've tried letters. We've tried meetings. We've begged. We've pleaded. They want us silent. They want us erased." Lillian's reply came as barely a whisper. "Then, what choice do we have left?" The hours stretched. Dawn crept over the valley. The machines still waited. The orange flags still mocked. And the Johnsons knew, when the sun rose, they would have to act. The dawn air was cold, damp with mist. Harold stood at the dam with his hand on the rusted wheel, the same mechanism his great-grandfather had turned a century before to feed crops. Lillian stepped beside him, her eyes locked on the orange flags staked into the earth above the stones. Her hand covered his. "Together," she said. The wheel groaned, metal grinding against metal. Then it gave way. Water surged forward with a roar that shook the valley. The creek swelled into a torrent, bursting over the stones, racing downhill with unstoppable fury. Within moments, it was no longer a stream but a wall of water. It hit the cul-de-sac first. Frames of houses collapsed like toy blocks. Freshly poured driveways cracked and crumbled. Fences snapped and tumbled like twigs. Workers screamed as equipment toppled into the flood. Families ran barefoot through the chaos, clutching children, dragging pets, stumbling across lawns that dissolved beneath their feet. A man shouted for his wife, his voice swallowed by the water. The sound of breaking glass, splintering wood, and human cries blended into a single symphony of destruction. At the top of the hill, Lillian and Harold held their ground. They didn't cheer, they didn't cry. They simply watched as the flood carried away weeks of disregard, washing over the arrogance of the HOA's progress. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't malice. It was survival. For the first time in weeks, the HOA had no choice but to see them. And for the first time, the Johnsons knew they had been heard. By noon, the sky above Bradford Creek hummed with helicopters. News crews lined the streets, their cameras trained on waterlogged houses, ruined cars, and families piling belongings onto front lawns. Reporters shouted into microphones as if competing for the most sensational headline. "Breaking news out of Georgia," one anchor declared. Dozens of newly built homes in the Bradford Creek subdivision destroyed in a sudden flood. Officials are investigating reports. The nearby dam was deliberately opened. Enfax Dam. The Johnsons stood at the edge of their porch, water still dripping from the valley below. Neighbors glanced up at them, some with horror, others with quiet awe. When the first reporter reached them, Harold didn't flinch. He faced the camera, his voice steady. "We begged them to listen. We wrote letters. We went to meetings. We told them this land carries our family's blood. They called us obsolete. They erased our history. So if they wouldn't hear us, the land itself spoke." The words ignited a storm. Online, clips of Harold's statement spread like wildfire. Some hailed the Johnsons as heroes standing against systemic theft. Others called them dangerous, reckless, even terrorists. At the HOA office, Emily Grant held her own press conference, her lips pressed into a thin smile, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. This was sabotage. It endangered families. It destroyed property. We demand Harold Johnson's immediate arrest. By nightfall, flashing lights painted the Johnson driveway red and blue. Officers stepped out with grim expressions, their radios crackling. Lillian clung to Harold's arm as they read the charges: reckless endangerment, property damage, obstruction. Neighbors gathered silently at the edge of the lawn. Some whispered, "It's gone too far." Others bowed their heads, ashamed they had never stood by the Johnsons sooner. As handcuffs clicked around Harold's wrists, he turned his head toward the dam. Its stones glistened in the floodlight, battered but still standing. His voice was calm. "Samuel built it to last. And it will." The courthouse in downtown Bradford Creek had never seen so many cameras. Satellite vans clogged the square. Protesters crowded the steps, their signs clashing in the hot sun. On one side, justice for the Johnsons, and land has a memory. On the other, no excuse for sabotage, and safety before sentiment. Inside, Harold sat at the defendant's table. His shoulders were square, his expression calm, but the handcuffs had left raw marks on his wrists. Beside him sat his attorney, flipping through a stack of papers already damp with sweat. The prosecutor wasted no time. "This man endangered lives," she told the jury. "He destroyed homes, terrified families, and caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage. This was not justice. This was reckless destruction." The jury's eyes flicked to Harold. He didn't flinch. When the defense rose, the room shifted. "This is not just about water and homes," the lawyer said firmly. "This is about history, about a family that begged to be heard and was silenced at every turn." Harold Johnson did not act out of malice. He acted because he had no other choice. Witnesses took the stand. An elderly farmer testified, "Samuel Johnson showed my father how to survive the drought of '32. That dam isn't just stone, it's heritage." Gasps rippled through the gallery, but the most powerful voice didn't come from the stand. It came from the courthouse steps. Lillian stood before the microphones, her hands trembling as she clutched a faded photograph of Samuel Johnson at the dam. "They call us criminals," she said, her voice breaking but clear. "But the real crime is erasing history and calling it progress. My husband is not a destroyer. He is the son of a man who built, the son of a man who endured, and I will not let his name be buried under their concrete." The crowd erupted cheers, mixing with shouts, the air alive with conflict. Clips of her speech spread online faster than the flood itself. Comment sections filled with arguments, sympathy, rage, and debate. Inside, the judge's gavel hammered against the wood. Order was slipping, both in the courtroom and far beyond. Whispers spread through town like wildfire. It began with a single leaked document, a zoning approval signed months before the public hearing. The date didn't match the HOA's timeline. Someone, somewhere, had rushed it through. Local journalists dug deeper. Soon, headlines filled the front pages. Permits pushed through without review. Community feedback falsified. HOA ignored warnings about dam safety. The spotlight turned harshly on Emily Grant. Once polished and untouchable, she now faced reporters shouting questions about backroom deals and falsified reports. She brushed past them with her jaw tight, but the cracks showed. Neighbors who had once applauded her began to murmur. Progress, they realized, had a price, and it wasn't just the Johnsons who were paying it. Inside the courtroom, Harold's lawyer seized the moment. "The HOA calls my client reckless," he told the jury. But who is truly reckless? The man protecting his family's legacy? Or the association that bulldozed history, falsified signatures, and gambled with lives for profit? Gasps rippled through the room. Emily sat, stone-faced, her eyes fixed forward, but sweat beaded at her temple. The judge leaned forward. His gavel struck, echoing off the walls. "This case has outgrown its bounds," he said. "This is no longer just about one man's actions. It is about the conscience of a community." The gallery erupted in whispers. Some nodded in agreement, others shook their heads. The prosecutor demanded order, but the tension was uncontainable. And then, in a single stunning move, the judge delayed the verdict. "Further review of HOA records will be required," he declared. "This court will not rush justice where justice has already been denied." Emily's composure cracked. Her face tightened as reporters swarmed her on the courthouse steps. Meanwhile, Harold was led out past the crowd, still in cuffs but walking taller than ever. Because for the first time, it wasn't just him on trial. It was the entire system that had tried to bury his family's legacy. The floodwaters receded, but their impact remained. Mud-streaked houses stood like wounded soldiers, reminders of a fight that had shaken an entire community. The trial dragged on, but its ripple effects spread farther than the courthouse walls. Under pressure, city officials rewrote zoning laws, pledging stricter oversight and mandatory consultation with landowners. Civil rights groups descended on Bradford Creek, vowing that what happened to the Johnsons would never happen again. Across the state, other families began telling their own stories of land, nearly lost stories long ignored until now. And through it all, Emily Grant's empire crumbled. Investigations piled up, board members resigned, developers backed away, citing reputational risk. For someone who once controlled entire neighborhoods with her pen, the silence around her was deafening. Meanwhile, the Johnson property endured. The orchard was scarred, the meadow torn apart, but the dam still stood. Its stones, though battered by water and time, refused to fall. On a cool evening months later, Harold and Lillian sat on their porch. The glow of construction lights was gone now, replaced by the quiet hum of crickets. The air smelled of damp earth, healing slowly. Lillian leaned into Harold's shoulder, holding a faded photograph of Samuel Johnson. His face, stern yet proud, stared back at her across the decades. "They thought they buried us," she whispered, "but we are the roots." Harold's hand covered hers. His voice was gravelly but steady, and roots don't drown easy. They sat in silence, two elders watching the land their family had fought to protect. Not just dirt, not just timber. A living chronicle of resilience, defiance, and love. The fight had cost them dearly, but it had also reminded a community, and perhaps the world, that history cannot be bulldozed, heritage cannot be erased, and justice cannot be silenced forever. The dam stood, the Johnsons endured, and the story of their fight would echo long after the last floodwater dried. If this story moved you, don't let it fade. Like the video, share it, and subscribe, because the voices of families like the Johnsons deserve to be heard.